So this is going to be a different type of video than what I normally do. This is um, what I mentioned in my update video. I'm going to start doing videos on bands, mainly Chicago because, yeah, Chicago, because I know a lot more about them than any other band. Um, but anyways, so how did Chicago lose their fame after Terry Kath passed away? So we know the band Chicago, okay? We remember their songs like Saturday in the Park. Even people these days, they know 25 or 6 to 4, Saturday in the Park, and stuff like that. And those were all in the era that Terry Kath was alive and part of the band. And, when he died to a gunshot wound, which was an accident. He did not do it on purpose. Do not even think about saying that he did it on purpose. You will get absolutely roasted by people in the comments. So just save yourself that right now. Do us all a favor. But, the reason they kind of fell off, and my own mom even kind of agrees with this. After watching 3 documentaries on Chicago, she definitely thinks that the best music came from those guys when Terry was alive. Because when he was gone, their sound was kind of softened, and it changed a lot. They just lost one of their best friends, who was not only an amazing person, but he was an amazing musician with a big, huge talent on guitar and singing at the same time. Not many people can play a lead rhythm guitar part at the same time. A lead and rhythm guitar part at the same time, and then sing on top of that. That's doing 3 things right there. 3. That's insane. And, he got the attention of Jimi Hendrix. Jimmy, on the other hand, was very well known at that time, and he's still very well known now. But given all that, I haven't seen Terry listed in any top guitar player lists. I looked through a magazine at my girlfriend's house of the 100 greatest guitar players of all time, and Terry wasn't in it. It was so weird. I don't even understand because of all the talent that he had, and he could play bass too. I've heard that he was a phenomenal bass player back when he was with the Missing Links, which was his old band. But after he died, the band had every reason to break up. They had been absolutely consumed and kind of destroyed by drugs. That's what it did to Terry. That on top of not sleeping for a few days, and when you tour as intense as a band like Chicago, things are bound to get pretty crazy. And, they probably shouldn't tour so intensely, especially these days, because, they're kind of an oldies act now. It would be a lot more special if it wasn't so often, but at the same time, they only come to San Antonio maybe every other year. So maybe it is a bit more special, but they still do probably 100 shows a year, which isn't too bad, but they're getting up there in years, so I don't think they should be doing that to themselves so much, because it is going to be stressful, no matter how long you've done it. I don't think those guys will be getting atrophy anytime soon. But, yeah, once Terry was gone, they didn't have that driving force that informed the band and that made them want to move forward. And you know, his guitar playing had a big part in that too. Like, he would be soloing and probably be half a beat in front of everyone else and just dragging the band along with him. Like, the mind of the guy was just insane. There's a part of his song called Introduction that goes into 19/8. Like the fact that he can think up something like that is incredible. And you know, he was looking at the stuff that Jimmy Pankow was doing, writing for guitar on the ballet, and he was like, oh, this is nothing. You know, because he listened very intensely to Frank Zappa, Jimi Hendrix, you know, people like him, like those guys. And, you know, he knew their songs very well, and they were listening very intensely to the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And, you know, people think of Chicago as, like, you know, anatomy. You know, you have Terry, the soul of the band, Peter, the voice of the band, Danny, the heart of the band, the horns, the identity of the band, and Robert, the mind of the band. And when Terry died, they lost their soul, and they were lost for quite a few years. Like, Terry really brought out the best in those guys. You know, they always had fun with him. Everybody loved Terry. Everyone that Terry met, whether it was fans or, you know, people like his widow, like, everyone loved Terry. Like, how could you not like that guy? Even after he insulted England, they mourned his passing. And, you know, he really brought out the best in those guys. And no one has been able to do that since. And that's most likely why they haven't put out songs that were as good as the Kath era of Chicago. Because, like, I mean, you know, losing someone like that early on, like, is going to be, like, that's going to affect you the rest of your life. Like, if you lose one of your parents when you're 14, that's going to affect you the rest of your life, versus if it happens when you're 60, you know? Because, like, most people lose their parents when they're much older, but if it happens when you're really young, like, it's going to affect you the rest of your life, even more so than if it were to happen at 60. It would still be affecting you worse at that time than it would if it were to happen then, if that makes sense. So, like, Robert Lamb said he's still working through losing Terry, and, like, how can you blame him? You know? And they just got a new producer. They got rid of Gercio because he said, this guy's gonna be dead in 6 months, and I don't want to contribute to this downfall and this thing that you guys have gotten yourself into. And Terry didn't like that, so they got rid of him, and they got a new producer. I believe it was Howard Kaufman. And lo and behold, very soon after that, I think 6 weeks after that, he was calling each individual member, telling them, you're not going to believe this, but Terry shot himself. And it was very hard for all of them. And then Terry Kath experience, like, you could actually see Walt starting to tear up thinking about it. And in the Now More Than Ever documentary, Lee is the one that cracks right there. He did it a couple times. And yeah, I mean, it's hard losing someone like that, you know? And after that, they couldn't find anyone else. You know, it's frustrating trying to find someone to, you know, fill a position like that, you know? Like, if you need someone for, it's kind of like, you know, when Mrs. Doubtfire was shown to be not a real person. You know, like, how are you going to you know, find someone to replace someone like that. You know, you just don't, okay? Like, people like that only come around, like, maybe once a century, okay? And, you know, after the producer that produced Chicago 14, um, CBS dropped them for $2 million. They paid them that to leave the label, and then they, on their way home, their plane they were on got struck by lightning. And then they had the subsequent greatest hits album, which was Chicago 15, as part of a it was a mandatory thing with the contract before it was up. So, and then Chicago 16 came along, and the songs that they were going to put on that were not really that good. I've listened to the album, and yeah, those songs are not that good. Hard to Say I'm Sorry and Love Me Tomorrow didn't come along until David Foster teamed up with Peter. Because before before Hard to Say I'm Sorry and Love Me Tomorrow were written, David Foster wasn't even a part of the instrumentation and the production of the album. So Peter was just like, I don't even want to be here. You know, he was frustrated with the whole thing. And you know, David just didn't really bring out the best in those guys as much as, you know, nowhere near as much as Terry could have. Like, let's be honest, I think he even killed the creative musicality of Robert Lamb, which is very, very upsetting, because Robert was, and still is, an incredible songwriter. Like, Question 67 and 68 and Dialogue are incredible songs. Like, you can't beat stuff like that. There's no there's no going up against that, you know. And David softened their sounds quite a bit. But I mean, they adapted to the times really well, you know. 80s pop and 80s ballads were a whole different thing, okay? Like, when you think of 80s music, you can't help but think of songs like Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper, and then songs like I'm Free by Kenny Loggins. Then you have Right Here Waiting by Richard Marx. Like, that is the definition of 80s music. Let's be real, okay? Richard Marx and Cyndi Lauper are the king and queen of 80s ballads, okay? There is no getting past that. You know, things took a really big turn in the 80s, and Chicago adapted to them really well. People don't think that that's such a good thing. People think that that's unfortunate that they adapted. But, I mean, you gotta fit in with the trends, you know? You gotta keep up to date, you know? It's just like, you know, if you don't have 5G internet in 5 years, like, what are you gonna be? Like, no one's gonna wanna go to your house. Like, come on, let's be real here. You know, you have to stay up to date with things. And so they did, and they did it quite well. You know, Chicago 16 was an okay album. Chicago 17 was amazing. I don't know how David got it out of those guys. But I actually have the album on vinyl. So, like, every song on Chicago 17 is just a killer song. You know, like Stay the Night is a Peter Cetera song. We Can Stop the Hurtin', Robert Lamb. Hard Habit to Break. That one wasn't written by any of the members. It was written by Steve Kipner and Jay Parker. Only You, another great song. That was written by Jimmy Pankow. And then Remember the Feeling, which is a beautiful song. It combines orchestra, strings, and electric just perfectly. It is such an amazing song. I've actually done a bass cover of that song. That was written by Peter Cetera and Bill Champlin, which they worked very, very well together. I also liked Bill Champlin's work with Jason Sheff. And then Along Comes a Woman, that's another Peter song. You're the Inspiration, also Peter. Please Hold On is a song that Bill Champlin wrote with David Foster and Lionel Richie, which is pretty cool. And Prima Donna from the song Two of a Kind is also from Peter and Mark Goldenberg. And then Once in a Lifetime by Jimmy Pankow. Oh my gosh, that song is something else. Okay, I don't know how that didn't become a hit, but I listened to that song once as I was contemplating a song for one of my Instagram stories, and I was like, whoa, I've heard this before. And that was the third time that that had happened with Chicago. Okay, because I recognized Question 67 and 68, and then I recognized Baby What a Big Surprise. Those were two songs that I definitely heard at some point in my childhood, and I remembered them very well. And then it happened yet again with Once in a Lifetime. And, you know, like all these songs that I recognize came from Chicago. And it is just like, how cool is that? You know, I've always felt such a deep connection with Chicago's music, especially the songs that were written by Peter. And then I discovered that I share a birthday with Peter, and I also play bass, so that's pretty cool. But getting back on track, you know, David just really didn't bring out the best in those guys. I don't even know where they got the influence for the songs that were on this album, which, by the way, if you haven't listened to this album, Chicago 17, absolutely, this is a must-have, alright? If you own a turntable, definitely go pick one of these up, okay? And Chicago 18 is really good as well. You have songs that were written mostly not by members of the band, which is why people critique Chicago a lot, is because they started sourcing their songs instead of writing them. But it just goes to show that, you know, the fans they really stay well aware of what the band is doing and what they're writing. But you know, when that doesn't matter to you, the songs are amazing. You know, like even if they are written by Diane Warren, or other people like that, and Chicago 19, Chicago 21, those albums are both amazing. I love Chicago 21, okay? You know, that was their first album of the 90s. That was the first one with Triss and Bowden. And, you know, they had quite a heyday. And I've seen some clips of Chicago concerts from the 90s, and they were a riot, okay? They were incredible. Like, you know, with Dwayne Bailey and Bill Champlin on guitar, like, come on, man. Like, there is no beating that. You know, especially, and then Jason Sheff on top of it, playing bass, and then Robert Lamb on a guitar. Come on, man. And, you know, these guys, they were all kids. You know, Dwayne grew up listening to Chicago, and then he was in the band, you know, after being with Bob Seger. You know, like, this band is just incredible. Like, for a band to withstand, like, a bunch of elements like they have is nearly impossible, you know? But they didn't break up, Queen didn't break up, I don't know of any other bands that had something happen and they didn't break up, but yeah, those two didn't break up, and those are two of probably like the most incredible bands to this day. And then you have bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival, which did break up, sadly. Very nasty. And then Rush broke up because they lost their drummer. He died. But, yeah. But the real reason that people think that Chicago fell off is because they stopped writing songs and only sourced them. That's the real reason for it. And after Peter left, I do not like this, by the way. After Peter left, Lee said that it's not going to stay the same. It's got to go somewhere. He didn't say that after Terry died. Robert said that after Terry died, but Lee didn't. So he obviously has a grudge against Peter. And, you know, life is just too short to hold grudges like that, especially for that long. Like, you know, that was another mistake that they made was not letting Peter do a solo album. Because, well, Bill Champlin was in the band, they let him do solo albums, they let Robert Lamb do solo albums, why the hell wouldn't they let Peter? Like, it makes no sense to me. I guess they just didn't want him owning the band and doing his own thing on the side, I don't know. And he had no real backing from the record company because they wanted him to stay with Chicago. And, you know, it's really unfortunate that, you know, he doesn't have the fame that he deserves, but he is still very well known. You know, anyone from my parents' age group will immediately know who he is. People from my age group, not so much. You know, I'm 18, so not a lot of 18-year-olds will say that the very best Chicago, Only the Beginning, was the most influential album of my teenage years. You know, not many people say that these days. You know, I know that. But, like, they've got so many amazing songs. And, you know, just Bill Champlin alone could absolutely produce that single-handedly. Like, you can't compete with someone like Bill Champlin. You know, and that was another big mistake they made, was getting rid of him. They absolutely should not have. And getting rid of Danny, that was another thing. Getting rid of Donnie, getting rid of Chris, I could critique them all day. But what happened, all for a reason. So, it is what it is. They are still a great band. I still have a lot of respect for them. Their current lineup is amazing. And if you haven't listened to their latest album, Born for This Moment, highly recommend it. And this is the first original studio album they've had in a long time. Like, okay, we're talking since the 80s. Okay, this is almost 40 years. Almost 40 years since they've released an original studio album. And they're saying this may be the last album. So we're giving it every ounce of energy that we've got. And I remember listening to the single, If This Is Goodbye, when it was released on YouTube. And I listened to it, I was like, whoa, like, it was incredible. And then I listened to it with my mom, and she was like, it was so good. And, yeah, like, there's just, like, they are still good. There is no denying it, okay? Neil Donnell is amazing with vocals, okay? And he plays guitar now, so people can stop calling him a karaoke singer, okay? Like, just lay off of that. You know, he gets hate, Jeff Coffey got hate, Jason Scheff got hate, Peter got hate. That's just, it's gonna happen. You know, people are going to critique all their lives because that's all they want to do. That's all they've got. And, you know, honestly, the band will play on until they're the last band on stage in the whole world. So, even with Terry gone, they have still done some great stuff. Stone of Sisyphus is another pretty good album that had a lot of composure done by Dwayne Bailey. So anyway, that's what I'm going to leave it as. I'm going to leave it off right here. I've covered everything, and hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you found it informative. As always, I will talk to you all real soon, and thank you for watching.